This video is just a quick introduction to Photoshop. For those of you that have not used it before, and for those of you that have, just a couple of things that you might not know or that you might not use very often in Photoshop. So when we get to opening Photoshop, this is what we see. It might say create new or it might say new file, but I'm going to go to new file. And for the purpose of this, I'm just going to create an A3 document. If you're familiar with Adobe products, you'll understand this sort of interface here. You've got different sort of templates up here, so if you're going to print this design out, you're looking at sort of poster sizes or paper sizes, they're all in here. If it's specifically going to be used as a piece of art or illustration, then again you've got different art sizes, same for web, etc. We've got all our settings down here, so we've got obviously our colour modes as well. So for example, if I go to print, you can see I get the option for CMYK. So that should feel fairly familiar to you. So I will just do a quick A3 document for now. So this is our workspace. A little bit similar to Illustrator in the fact that you have your tools down the left hand side on your toolbar, and you have your menu at the top, and then you have your sort of work area here, and other sort of additional panels like our properties panel on the right hand side. This little icon up here will also let you control that. So you see I've got mine on Essentials, which is just sort of the basic layout with all the basic tools that we need. And if, for example, I get my character panel and I drag it out and then I delete it by accident and I do the same with my properties panel, or I close this panel down and I want to get things back and I've lost things, then I can go up to here and go to Reset Essentials. So hopefully that will feel fairly familiar for you guys. If there's any panels here that I want that I don't currently have, then I can go up to Window and you can see I've got all of the ones in here. So for example, my character panel, which is sort of my typography. The important one really in Photoshop is our Layers panel, which is down here. And I'm going to expand that out so you can see the whole thing. So every time we create something new in Photoshop, so for example a piece of text, and again another piece of text, and again another piece of text, you can see it naturally builds a new layer. So every single thing we do on Photoshop will add a new layer most of the time. So that gets quite busy quite soon. So you can double click on the layer itself and just rename it. You can also hold Shift, select a few layers, right click, and then you can do a range of things. You can merge those layers together, which will flatten them and turn them into one object. You can link those layers so that if you move one, the other one will move too. If you make one opaque, the other one will become opaque too, etc. So they're sort of joined together but not flattened, so they're still separate, but they are edited together. Or we can put them in a group, so we've got a little folder icon down here. Groups are really important, especially in Photoshop, just to organise your content, to make sure everything's nicely put in one place. So I would definitely recommend using groups. I'd recommend naming those groups, so you've got things like background and text, etc., so that it's super clear what's going on in your layers panel and you can find things easily. We can also lock those by using this little padlock up here. So I select the layer I want to lock and I'm going to lock it. My opacity is up here as well. So let's say I'm going to select these and I'm going to use the little bucket here, which is a bin icon to bin those, delete them. So if I go now and draw myself some text, you can see when I do my opacity, that controls that layer and only that layer. And if I put some other text underneath it in a different colour perhaps, you should be able to sort of see that through. Change the opacity down, you can then see the other text underneath it. So really simple introduction to your layers panel. So all of your layers can be named, all of your layers are separate objects or items that you have created. Whenever you create something, always put it on a new layer. So especially if you're going to use, for example, the brush tool here. So I'll just give you a really basic sort of example. If I'm going to, I don't know, draw a line through that text, you can see it's on a new layer. So I can now control that, I can move that, I can make it bigger, I can make it smaller. If I'm not quite happy with it, I'm going to lock those two so that they don't shift. it's its own thing, so it's editable in its own right. If I had not done that, so if I delete that layer and I unlock this and I go back to my paintbrush and I do the same thing again, you can see it's already telling me don't do it because I'm getting an error. But that would draw, so if I do rasterize this, so if I go again and try and do it, click OK, you can see now it goes over the top of the text. It's on the same layer, so I can't select that on its own. They're joined up, so they're permanent and I can't do anything about that. So always make sure you've got stuff on separate layers so that you've got that constant ability to go back, readjust, amend, move, change. Now I'm just going to delete everything that's on our layers panel at the moment. Unlock that, delete that. So if we look in our tools on the left hand side, this is where the majority of the stuff is that we need. We've got selection tools. Now selection tools let you select parts of stuff, so parts of a shape, parts of text, parts of an image. Our marquees are sort of set shapes, so a rectangular marquee obviously can be sort of any shape you want it to be. And then we've got elliptical, and then we've got single row or column. We've also got some options up here. So this is obviously a single option, so when I redraw, it redraws the whole thing each time. I've got a double option, so I can have more than one selection and I can add to that selection. I've got this option, which is sort of minus the front, so that means I can minus parts out of that selection. So now it would only select the bit that's in between these shapes. And then I've got difference, which would select the bit within the bit I've selected. Now if I just fill, so if I make a new coloured layer, and I've got blue, you can see my colour panel, I've got blue selected, so I'm going to fill that blue. It will only fill in that area. If I do the opposite way around, so if I do Command D to deselect, and I'm just going to do a random paint bucket tool, you can see it fills my whole page, which might be what you want, it might not be what you want. It's also done it on my background layer, which is not what I want. So now I've got a new layer, I filled that. So then if I wanted to, say, I don't know, do that, when I do Command C, Command V, it will only select, so it'll only cut out that section of the blue. So that's our sort of marquee tools. Our other selection tools are our lasso and polygonal lasso. So again, if I get my blue layer up, my normal lasso, you just click, 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 click. So it does very clear sort of polygonal geometric lines, which is great for cutting things out in triangle shapes. It's great for cutting around edges of an image or a shape that are angular. Works lovely for that. Again, if I want to get rid of that selection, I'm not happy with it, Command D. I've then got Lasso Tool, which follows, you click and hold and it follows. This is really good if you're using sort of a Wacom or a stylus or a pen connected to your computer, and then you can draw exactly what selection you want. With a mouse, it's basically sort of useless if you're just using a mouse, it's too complex. The other option we've got is magnetic lasso. Now I'm actually going to draw a circle for this so you can see what happens. Now, you can see when I draw, it doesn't scale automatically. I've got this awful squishy shape. If I hold Shift, that will give me a perfect ratio when I'm scaling. So Shift is really important when you're making things bigger and smaller. You don't want to stretch them unless you're stretching them on purpose. Now, I've got a circle here. When I go to my magnetic lasso, I'm going to go to the correct layer. When I click here, you can see it sort of naturally sticks to that edge. You see it sort of glues itself to the edge. Now I'm just going to do Command Z, backspace to go back a little bit. So this will naturally, as long as you've got an image with enough contrast, so I've got a blue shape here on a white background, it will detect the edge of that image, and I'm going to click regularly to sort of keep it in its place, because sometimes it will go AWOL. But this is magnetic, so it magnetizes to what it thinks the outline of the shape is that you want. Doesn't always work perfectly. If your image is really complicated, it won't work. But in this case, you can see it's done a pretty good job. There's only a tiny little bit there that I'm not too happy with. So great for cutting images out when they're sort of something that would take too long with the polygonal lasso. Another option for things that are sort of complicated is our magic wand on here. We've got some other options like quick selection tool, but magic wand is probably my favourite of those. So if I go to, let me type some text. So I've got some text. Let's say I want to select that text and I want to use that shape and fill it with a different colour or something like that. You can see when I magic wand it, it automatically selects the edge of the text. Now it might not always do that, so if I just do that again, this time I've got contiguous selected and that only selects one letter. So if I unselect contiguous, it will select all of them, so everything of that colour. If I have contiguous selected, it will only select the colour that is the object it thinks that is sort of all connected and touching each other. So when you're deleting backgrounds out of images, if you've got a photograph that's got a white background in it or a certain area that's all one colour, Magic Wand can be great for this. You've got other options up here again, like our other selection tools, and you've got things like tolerance, etc., which becomes more important when you're working with complex images. So those are our sort of 3 different types of selection tool. The other things we're going to need to know is things like Eyedropper, which eyedrops your colour, and then obviously I could draw on a new layer and paint with that colour, etc. We've got Eraser, which obviously will erase anything if I'm not happy with it and I want rid. Now you'll notice if I go to this shape, for example, it won't let me, and it's saying Rasterize. Now Rasterize means that that shape is no longer a circle, it's an image layer. So at the moment it's a circle, and if I go back to my circle tool, I can still go in, edit the colour, add an outline to it, etc. As soon as I rasterize it, it's a bit like when you do create outlines or expand appearance in Illustrator, it becomes a flat sort of image layer, so it's no longer sort of this ellipse that we've made. So if I right click and I rasterize that layer, you'll see that there's a lot more things I can do to it now, so I can erase part of it out. So quite often, and this is especially with text as well, same thing, I can't do anything to my text. I can't use the eraser, I can't rub part of it out. I have to rasterize it. As soon as I've rasterized it, I can start to do all sorts of funky things to my text. So I'll do Command Z just to undo all of that. So rasterize is basically flattening an image or a shape or something that you've made. Quite often, if, say for example, I've got lots of these, so I'm just going to hold Alt to duplicate, or you can do Command C, Command V. So I've got loads of these and I want to merge them so that they're one sort of solid object. I'm not going to change them, I want to do some funky stuff, I want them merged. I'm going to have to rasterize, because you'll see it doesn't give me an option for merge, I haven't got that there. So if I rasterize it, when I next go, you'll see that merge is now an option and I can merge those together and I've got one flat layer. You might think, well, why don't you group it? But if I wanted to say Magic Wand this and then select that out of an image or something, then I would need this as one layer. So there are some options here where we want one layer. Obviously we've got things like the paint bucket tool, we've got a gradient tool. Now gradient tool, you'll notice, will go on the layer you've got it on, so that's going to completely cover up my text. So always build yourself a new layer to put your gradient tool in. You could, in theory, if I built a new layer and then did a rectangular marquee, I could go back to my gradient tool and it would just go in the marquee. If I had that, you can see there. So gradient tool basically applies over whatever you've got selected or whatever area you're working in, so sometimes you need to sort of control that. Paint bucket tool is the same, so if I go back to say this layer, Command D my selection and just click that, it will just fill the whole page. Oh no, you can see it's the same colour as my text. If I change that, it should fill the white. Obviously if I then go in, it will also fill these. But now I can't edit that. Obviously I can't move that text around because that's one image, that's one flat thing. So same again with the paint bucket tool. Be sort of cautious with using that willy-nilly. The other ones you're probably going to want to know is there's a similar sort of pen tool to Illustrator. Obviously not as much control over it as you do have in Illustrator, but it does create sort of custom shapes. And then your text tool and things like vertical type tool on our shape tools here. All of that is pretty standard. The rest you can sort of figure out through experimentation. You'll see up here changes. My menu bar changes depending on what tool I'm using. So all of your options for that tool become available in this top bar here. Whereas if you're used to Illustrator, it generally appears in your properties panel on the right. In Photoshop, if I'm using text, my options for text are up here. They do sometimes appear in the properties panel if you've got that layer selected. So a text layer, for example, if I have this shape layer selected and I go to my properties, it will then give me the options for the shape. But you can guarantee if you're using the paint bucket tool, the paint bucket options will be at the top. If you're using the text tool, your text options will be up at the top. The last thing to sort of show you in that layers panel, so I'll show you with these two overlapping shapes, is your transparency. Again, if you're used to using Illustrator, transparency is its own window and you have to sort of bring that panel in. In Photoshop, this is embedded right up at the top here. So we've got our opacity here and then we've got our blend modes here, which you can see if you've got an object over the top of another object, will control how those two objects interact. So you can create some quite interesting effects with those. So that's where our blend modes are. If you have done clipping masks before, you can do clipping masks in Photoshop, but that's something I'll come on to at a later date, or something that you can have a little look into for yourself. So that's the bare bones of Photoshop. Get familiar with the tools, get familiar with what all of these sort of other options up here are. Try the tools, test them out, figure out where things are, figure out your layers panel, group your layers, merge your layers, link your layers, see how they all work, and just get really confident with the workspace, the interface, the way it differs from other Adobe software.